Thank you. So we're here tonight, as you may have guessed, to talk about what the heck this building is. Why does it look like this? It looks like a crazy quilt of buildings. And what the heck is going on down on Somerset Street, which is empty. We have a whole 2 blocks of nothing in Hopewell Borough. So things are very strange. So that's a good excuse to talk about this and figure out how we got to where we are. And then from there, the town can figure out where we want to go. So step one, figure out where we are, okay? So what we want to do before I get started is do the pitch. So here's the pitch. The Hopewell Valley History Project is just an ad hoc collection of people, all volunteer. We have about 140 individual contributors who have contributed the stuff that Asher was talking about. And there's an interactive map of Hopewell there too. And from all that stuff, I've been able to do a bunch of research like this that you're seeing here now. And there's 40-some history brief research reports up on the site as well. And all of that is happening because people are contributing stuff. The whole point of the history project is to suck up as much, grab it and digitize it and scan it and photograph it and then get it online freely available for everybody. So if you have stuff, if you know of stuff, please get in touch and we'll do whatever's necessary to scan it and digitize it. You get digital copies back. If you're done with your stuff, I'll help you pass it on to the appropriate place to archive it. But no matter what, please get in touch. Because otherwise we wouldn't have things. So over here on the table, for example, is a bunch of material from the Hopewell Museum. There's no other copies of this stuff anywhere. And over on that table is a bunch of material that's turned up at the History Project. People have shipped boxes of stuff to me. People have dumpster dived and delivered materials. And you're seeing that kind of thing here tonight, which otherwise would be totally lost. So enough for that pitch. Next. So what are we talking about? So we have a nice busy diagram / map / annotated down at the bottom. We're talking about Somerset Street. So Somerset Street is this really odd street in the top right corner of Hopewell under the train line. So what you see on the map here is the train tracks going across the top, then Railroad Avenue goes across before you cross the train bridge. And then halfway down, Railroad Avenue changes its name to Somerset Street for who knows why. That's a good question. And then there's a bunch of stuff there. So along Railroad Place is a number of industrial sites that were part of the industrial growth of Hopewell, including the tomato factory and such. And then down right at that corner of Hamiliton are these 2 outlying properties. And these are the 2 properties that are currently in play for development right now. So the bottom property where this crazy quilt building is the southern portion on the southern side of Somerset Street. It's about 2.5 acres. That's the plant that was there. Then there is a northern parcel on the north side of Somerset, and that's currently a parking lot, and that's about 1 acre. So when you think about Somerset, there's north and south, but there's also east and west, because to the right of these outlined areas is a blue line. That's a stream. That's a tributary of the Beaton Brook, and that sort of marks a division in Somerset as well. Beyond that is the undeveloped territory, and a block and a half of nothing all along there till you get to the very end, which is Valley Oil. So this is the area that we're talking about today, okay? So how did we get where we are today? So to think about that, what we need to do is to move back to 1900 and see what was happening here in Hopewell at the time. So Hopewell was in the process of growing from a community, from a village into a town. And part of that was very strong efforts of the people of Hopewell to help make that happen. So one example of that are these two booklets on the right, top right. These are promotional booklets done around 1900 to promote the town, full of exciting pictures of the people and the things in the town, which are wonderfully helpful to us, obviously. And what really drove this in Hopewell was the arrival of the railroads in 1870. And from that, the town exploded with a whole bunch of activity. Part of that was just volunteering and fundraising. So people raised funds and built churches. People taxed themselves to build schools and build roads. If the local government wasn't ready to do things, they did it themselves. So they raised money and formed of a fire company and volunteered for the fire company. They raised money and created the Hopewell Public Library and the museum, etc. But they did more because local boosters saw the need for public services to make the town better. Town needs telephone, it needs water, it needs banks. And so local boosters created the companies to do those things. The town wasn't ready to put in a water system, so local boosters did it and then eventually sold it to the town. So this kind of activity was ongoing in Hopewell around 1900. This was just what they were doing here. The other thing they did was they formed companies to create local businesses that were really needed in Hopewell and weren't otherwise happening. So the chocolate factory building, for example, was sitting empty, not in use. They hadn't been able to find anybody else to go there. So town boosters created a chocolate company and started a chocolate business there. And the tomato factory is another example of that. Farmers and boosters got together almost like a co-op and created the tomato canning company and found a way to get great old Jersey tomatoes to market as a result of that. So this is going and going and going in Hopewell. The buildings that you see are the result of this kind of activity. And the final example of that is people were creating companies to attract new business. We think of that as a government function now, but again, people were doing that in the town. So for example, the chocolate factory was originally a shirt factory because boosters created a company, bought the land, and built the building. And then that was available so that the shirt company came. So this is going and going and going in Hopewell. So given that background, we come to 1900. So the next slide shows a map of Hopewell around 1902. So the background here is a fire map, 1902. The shaded regions are the map maker's indication of where there was something happening in Hopewell. So the rest of this is pretty much empty, okay? And what I've marked on this are the three phases of the growth of Hopewell. So that's what the red annotation here is. So phase one in the bottom left is West Broad Street, which is the old school Baptist church. That was the center of Hopewell. That was all there was in Hopewell in the 1700s, before it was Hopewell even. And so there was up into the late 1800s, that's pretty much all there was in Hopewell. There were some houses there, there were a couple businesses there, but not a whole lot of activity. Then in 1870, the first train line arrived. And that's marked on here. That's the horizontal line going across there. The Mercer and Somerset Railroad arrived. And that's the railroad that lost the Frog War. And as a result, by the end of that decade, it was out of business and then the tracks were torn up and it was gone. But essentially ran down our Model Avenue, our Railroad Avenue, and then our Somerset Street, okay? So as a result, in the top left here, number 2, Model Avenue was the next area of growth in Hopewell. We don't see it now as an industrialized area so much, but it was a major area. The housing there, particularly the houses that are set back from the street, were built because the train line was there. There was a sawmill, there was a creamery, there was the lumber yard, which is still there, sort of in spirit right now. And so Model Avenue filled up as a result of that. Then the second train line arrived, our train line, the one that counts, right? And that led to the section 3 here in the top right, the development of Railroad Avenue. Because what had happened with the Mercer and Somerset is when they built their train station, if you look under the number 2 here, there's a diamond. That's where they built their train station, because the center of Hopewell was West Broad and the Old School Baptist Church. So they built just right north of that. But by the time the second train line arrived, 1876, Hopewell was moving east. It couldn't really go west because the ground changes and Llewellyn's in the way and all the rest of that. It was moving east. So that train line went in just down from the number 3 here is our train station today. And that was part of the growth of Hopewell East. And as a result, that area that's outlined here filled in and is clearly an industrial district as you go through it today. So if it's 1900, you understand how Hopewell's been growing, and you look at this map, what are you thinking about how Hopewell should grow next? Where should Hopewell go next? You want land that's near a train line, and you want a nice flat area where you can build lots of industrial fun stuff. It's obvious you go right. You go further east past Railroad Avenue. It's just utterly clear. So what was happening there in what we call Somerset Street? So here's a map from 1887. The right side of that is what we call Somerset, and it's empty. So why is it empty? Well, first of all, there was a train line there. The Mercer and Somerset was there. So there weren't houses built in the middle of the train line, obviously. And then in the 1890s, that area was brickyards. So the whole 9+ acres of that whole Somerset Street area turned out to have wonderful clay soil, and it had the stream there. So there was a lot of brick making happen there. We have almost no information about that except some newspaper articles. And I've talked to family members of the people who ran that brickyard, and they're just as frustrated as I am. But we do have this ad here for when it changed ownership. And what was there at that time on that 9+ acres were 65,000 bricks made by hand, right? And 12 tons of coal, and a whole bunch of other fun stuff there. So that area was in use, but it was clearly available to be developed. So what did the town do? Of course, so now we're at 1900. They created yet another new company to grow that area, and they called it the Hopewell Factory Inducement Company. Pretty clear what its purpose was, right? Can't argue about that. So they bought the brickyard property, all of Somerset Street, and their idea was the north side, the track side of Somerset, would be developed as the industrial area, and they would give away free land if they had to. They would help you build a building if they had to. And then the south side would be the residential area. So they're really following the model of Railroad Avenue the way it is today. One side's the train station, the other's residential. And so they were on the job of finding new business to come into that area. And in 1903, they thought they had found a big hit, which was the Hopewell Bobbin and Spool Company. And so this was an outside investors coming into Hopewell to get into this business. There was apparently an investment company that helped that happen in Hopewell, and they built a large frame factory. It opened in August 1904. The local barber hurt his hand there, and then a month later it was destroyed by fire. This is what happens when you build buildings out of wood in a time that you really didn't have fire departments and town water, right? So the building was destroyed. It was insured, but there's no sign in the newspapers that anybody had the heart to try to do that again. So for the next several decades, this inducement company kept working. So they had, sorry, it's beeping at me. They had 2 minor successes. A small woodworking company built a facility there, and one of the local restaurant owners decided liked making ice cream, so he built a little ice cream factory there, but nothing major in terms of bringing lots of jobs. And then the newspapers are full of these reports of other possibilities. So there was going to be a company from Philadelphia, there was a company from Trenton, there was another company that was going to come in and rent space. They were going to start another company there. So there were all these good ideas, and it just didn't pan out. So if you think of the inducement company in baseball lingo, they had 2 bunt singles and no singles, no doubles, no triples, no home runs, except for this one guy, Hugh Smith. So Hugh Smith shows up and he turns into the World Series winning Grand Slam, to continue the metaphor. He was a machinist and he shows up in town, and his dream is to create a factory and make machined parts of some sort. And the inducement company said, come on in, got him property, helped him build his building, and he was on his way. And that business grew into what we knew as Rockwell. And for 74 years, employed 200 to 400 people here in this town. Just a tremendous success. All thanks to this inducement company that pretty much did nothing else, but they got us Hugh Smith. So that's the story we're going to be looking at today. Zoom is being irritating to me. Hang on a sec. I get rid of that. Okay. So Hugh Smith shows up in Hopewell around 1900, and he has his father, Alfred, along, and a brother-in-law, and they're from Connecticut. And he and his father were machinists, they were clockmakers, and they built their first building. And thanks to the Smith family, we actually have a picture of Hugh A. Smith that arrived this morning. And there's some more of them over there on the table there, just great. So where was this factory? Well, we have this map, which is a fire map from 1902. So the way to think about where this property was, if you start at Somerset and Hamiliton, and you go down past the parking lot to the stream, that's about 200 feet. You double that, that's about 400 feet, and that's where this factory was. It was further up Somerset on the north side. So they built this factory. There were just 3 people working there, Smith, his father, and his brother-in-law. And Smith was working there. We know that because we have a report of him injuring his hand in the factory. But by 1904, they were adding new additions to the factory. And what were they doing there? Well, we have a long list here of all kinds of stuff. They were making their own tools, they were making their own machinery, they were making mechanical stuff, particularly with springs and gears. They were making novelties, they were making clocks, they were making parts and full products. They were certainly doing meters, measuring the flow of water and gas and electricity. They were using springs for oscillating fans and for rotating signs and things like that. So all kinds of stuff is happening in this building. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is the new factory building that they built in 1905. So only 4 years in, they needed a new factory building. And this factory building is there today, which was where the spool and bobbin factory was. So they built that there. And because of those promotional booklets I showed you earlier, we have this delicious picture of it. And so they built this as a 2-story building. They added a 3rd story later. And this ad that was in that booklet is just full of all the different things they were doing there, which is summarized at the bottom. It's just ridiculous, all the things that were going on there. So it's a very busy place, and they're doing well, and they're up to 27 employees at this time. So this brings us to 1915 and World War I. So Smith was not involved in the war effort, but it grows substantially because of the war, because European suppliers were cut off from American companies, particularly suppliers in Germany, obviously. And so companies that needed meter parts and clocks and that kind of thing came to Smith. And Smith grew very rapidly up to 72 employees and reincorporated their business as a stock company they called the H.A. Smith Manufacturing Company. So you're going to see lots and lots of references to new names for this business as we go along. So this is that same factory building we saw before, but now on a map, and it's 3 stories at this time. And the original factory building was still around. They were renting space in there apparently, and they used it actually as a hospital during a smallpox epidemic as well. So Smith is really moving. So the next slide talks about Hugh A. Smith. So let's meet the guy. Yeah.
Slide at the bottom is the shed. Is that the stone shed that we see?
Oh, I'm sorry. There's across from the Rockwell building across Somerset, there's the parking lot. To the left of that is the Twine building. And that was called a shed at the time. And we will meet that later. So thank you. Yes. So Hugh A. Smith, Hugh Alfred Smith, his father was Alfred, came to Hopewell, as I said, around 1901. He had 2 sisters, both of whom ended up with pieces of their family in Hopewell. He married Charlotte Loveland and had 6 children. And he and his father both had experience as machinists and clockmakers. And the family was from Litchfield, Connecticut. So what was his impact on Hopewell? Well, first of all, he provided jobs, as you have already seen. He paid taxes. He also used a lot of local suppliers for his business. So there's one example here in the top right. This is a J.B. Hill invoice for buying hardware products. And there's a bunch of other invoices over on the table there. And these invoices literally came out of the dumpster in Hopewell. Somebody found them, took them away, and shipped them to me. So bless their hearts. And he was involved in other local activities. He co-founded the Savings and Loan, for example, and that kind of thing. From a community point of view, he moved his family into the Stout House, which is the picture up here, which is the current museum, though it had a much more gaudy front porch at the time. In 1906, he was a member of the fire department, and he bought a vehicle for the fire department, because at that time, you moved fire equipment by manually carrying it or using horses. So this was the first, apparently, motorized version of the fire department. And he eventually sold this house to the Combined Library Museum in 1924 with a generous discount, as it said. From a civic point of view, he was elected to Borough Council in 1910. Then he was elected mayor in 1913 by a wide margin and reelected almost by acclamation in 1917. So think of this. He arrives in Hopewell in 1901. By 1906, he's buying one of the most impressive houses in Hopewell. And by 1910, he's elected to Borough Council. This guy's making an impact. It's very impressive. And for your entertainment purposes, here is some photos of Hugh A. Smith from his family that I said arrived this morning. So Alfred was the father. Hugh A. came to Hopewell with his father. His son, Alfred Hugh, they really liked those names, continued working at the company. Merlin, also known as Merlin, actually was with Rockwell up to the end in Hopewell. So there were 4 sons of these 2 sons who provided these photos. So in 1918, things changed for Hugh. He was doing great in Hopewell. His company was doing great, but his domestic life, as you can see here, was having problems. And we don't have primary records for all of this, so there's some hand waving here based on newspaper articles. He married around 1896. She divorced him. They remarried. And during this entire period, every even year for this entire consecutive period, they had 6 children. So it's like clockwork. Oh my gosh. Very dangerous. So in 1915, he files for divorce. The case is rejected. He's reelected and he appeals the divorce. And in 1918, the appeal is rejected as well. So he leaves. So he goes to Yardley and then he ends up in Belmar, where he is for the rest of his life doing construction work. And that would be enough, except if you're doing research, you have to keep searching and you find things. So in the Hopewell Herald in 1929 comes the news that Hugh A. Smith has disappeared, vanished from his home in Belmar, and he left a note for the family. Don't search for me, I will never return. And that's the end of Hopewell. That's the end of the stories in the Hopewell newspapers. So again, if you're up late and you have nothing better else to do, you keep searching more broadly, and you discover in December, just a couple months later, he marries Elizabeth Ermine Worrell, who was a dancer in New York, but he met in New Jersey a couple years before. Ta-da! And there's no records of any of this except newspaper articles. It's very frustrating. And then he lives in Belmar to 1944. So none of this really matters from a Hopewell point of view, except he left Hopewell. And he sort of left the company, but we don't really know exactly how much. So we're going to have to piece together that story. So now we're at 1927. Asbury Park News. It's that kind of thing. You just do more broad searches for Hugh A. Smith, and sometimes you find things. Yeah, just nutty. So 1927, up to 1927, Hugh's son, first child, Alfred Hugh Smith, was involved with Smith Manufacturing. He's on the list as an executive. He might have been the general manager. It's not clear exactly what, but he was here in Hopewell doing well, because when Smith left, some of the kids went with him, some of them didn't. And Alfred stayed here. And he followed his father. He was on the council. He was mayor. He was director of the fire department, the library, the building and loan, et cetera. And so he was here in 1927 when they built the building that you see here. This building, and you can see from the insert, is the first part of the current building. And it's still there. All these parts I'm going to show you are all still there in that complex. And you notice these are not frame buildings. These are brick and steel. They're designed to stay there. And they have certainly done that over all these years. So in this photo, we're looking diagonally from basically the tomato factory. So Somerset Street is to the left, Hamilton Avenue is to the right. So this is a long building running down Somerset Street. And it's a factory. It's very clearly a factory. And the building across the street that you saw a picture of earlier is still there and still being used. But this becomes the main factory building. Okay. So that's 1927. Excuse me. So in 1929, the ownership of this business changes. So the H.A. Smith Machine Company is purchased by the Pittsburgh Equitable Meter Company. Heading into the Depression, this meter company liked Smith and their products so much they bought the company. And they renamed it the Machine Company. So it's no longer the manufacturing company, it's the Machine Company. So the other big change at this point is that Herbert Rockwell came to Hopewell to run the Hopewell operation. And he stayed in Hopewell from 1929 till he retired in 1975, when after the business closed in Hopewell. And his brother, Colonel Willard F. Rockwell, was the head of the whole company. So he was brought by the Mellons apparently into Pittsburgh to take over the Equitable Meter Company. He was the one who renamed that company Rockwell, because that's a good solid name, right? And he was the one who then turned the business over to his son, Junior, who took over the business and took it from there. And we'll have some follow-up on that later. And so they were primarily manufacturing parts for the parent company at this time. So we have these two wonderful aerials at the bottom here. The date for these is 1932. What does that date mean? It's the Lindbergh kidnapping. So because the press descended on Hopewell, had nothing to report, they did anything to get a picture. So they flew, they hired airplanes to fly around and take pictures of Hopewell so that they could produce news that said, here's the town where all the press is sitting around doing nothing because there's no news. And so we have these wonderful aerials. We're just very, very lucky because of that. So the aerial on the bottom left, we're looking towards the tomato factory. So that's the tomato factory in the distance. The red line is Somerset Street. So you can see the building that's still there and the little building in front of it. And then in the bottom right of that is that long building we saw the picture of earlier with a little bump out. And the picture on the bottom right is a slightly different angle view. So in the bottom, we see that long building, the full building. And then across the street, we see the stuff that was there in what's now the parking lot, including that earlier building that we showed you earlier. So this is 1929. We move on to 1935, 37. So Smith Machine's going gangbusters. It's running 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. It's up to 100 employees. So the parent company invests in 2 new pieces of the building. And you can see those new pieces in the inset. But let me describe them from the picture point of view. So in the picture, we're looking from Hamilton Avenue. The first section is the 1-story, 4 windows section all the way on the left. That's that original building that ran down Somerset, still there. The next piece is a new entrance administration building. So the Smith, for the very first time, has a place where the suits can have offices that aren't in the factory. And that's what this building is. There's a main entrance, which is sort of nice to have as you grow as a company. And then coming out behind that is this long L-shaped extension that comes from the main building, stretching out to Lafayette. And that's still there too. So as you walk around the building, you will see all of these little pieces, which is just sort of nuts. So that's 1935. So we jump forward to World War II. So World War II, Smith was deeply, deeply involved in the war effort. One of the things they did was produce 100,000 aircraft instruments, turn and bank indicators. The thing that's important to us today is those had radium dials. So they would glow in the dark. Uh-oh. And so radiant contamination is an issue in that site and along Somerset because of that. The other thing they produced was 200,000 parachute quick releases. This was national news. Drew Pearson's national Washington, D.C. radio show announced that Smith and Hopewell had won the contract for this. And this is the device which we actually have thanks to Rich Anderson. Why are these important? The United States was ramping up to invade Europe. So how do you invade Europe and put boots on the ground? You stuff airplanes full of soldiers wearing parachutes, and then you fly them over enemy territory and you drop them out, right? So how's that going to work? Well, if the plane doesn't get blown up, if you don't get shot out of the air, if you don't get killed landing, you really want to get that parachute off quickly. And that's what this is all about. So you turn the quarter angle to unlock, and then you press, and these very large bolts that are holding actually 4 of these straps into it will pop right out. So that was the idea behind that. Big, big deal at the time. But meanwhile, the war effort had caused Smith to lose 64 employees. You start to realize the impact of a world war on a town. You see those kinds of numbers. And so they were desperate for help. So the ads here and the articles here in the bottom left show that. So We need your help to lift the axis. Pleasant working conditions. Age no barrier, and also gender was no barrier at the time. And so the articles were saying, yes, you're a teacher, you have a job, but you can come work the factory in the evenings. You can work the night shift, right? So big push for all of that. So that's the early 40s. So now we go to 45. And at this point, there's a change in the parent company. So Pittsburgh Equitable Meter becomes Rockwell Manufacturing, a much cooler name. And then soon thereafter, the site becomes the Hopewell division of the Rockwell Manufacturing Company. So that's the name that it carried the rest of the time. And you'll see that name on signs as we go forward because of that. Some other stuff was happening at the time. They opened a branch plant in Flemington in a former bowling alley, and I have no other information I've been able to find about that. They were using the chocolate factory building, which by then was empty again, as a warehouse. And they were still building all that same kind of stuff they've been building all along, both finished parts and also feeding the parent company as well. So in the bottom left, we have an aerial view, and you can see on the inset as well. They did add another building in this time. Behind that entrance building, there was a gap before the big L coming out, and they filled that gap. So there's constant construction going on in this place as well. So that's 45. Step forward to 1960. And this is the big addition. This is the corner of Hamilton and Lafayette. That whole corner is filled in. So you can see the picture in the bottom left. That looks like a one-story building. It's actually 2 stories because it goes underground, as you can see. And it was a major addition to the building, which by then was up to 200 plus employees. And the total size was about up to 100,000 square feet. It's a major facility. So there's a picture here of work on the factory, and there's a whole bunch of more factory pictures up here from the museum that you're welcome to come look at after. So if you look at this aerial, we don't have a date for it, but if you look at the cars, it looks like around 1962. And then in the background there is the parking lot, which is a parking lot at this time, except it has a building in the middle of it. But that's not the original building that we saw that was built there. This is a replacement building that they put in at some time. So again, just continual renewal, continual change at this site. So that's 1960. And here's some photos. Roger LeBlanc took some photos for us, bless his heart. So top left, we're looking from Lafayette. The building in the distance with the smokestack is the tomato factory. And so that's the main entrance part of the building. Picture at the top right, the camera's swept to the right a little, and we start to see that extrusion coming out. Bottom left, we've worked a little further down Lafayette. We're looking diagonally there. You can see the smokestack in the distance. And they started putting up Quonset huts in the back. This is the first of 2 Quonset huts they put up just to get more space quickly. And the bottom right is what it looked like when it was all done. Rockwell, Hopewell division with the circle lowercase r as the Rockwell insignia. Okay. 1963, another major change. Rockwell at that time had a general business philosophy of actually decentralizing and putting business units in a physical location. So they took their taxi meter business, which doesn't sound very exciting to us, and put it in Hopewell. So major effort for Hopewell. There were 5 models of taxi meters because you need to conform to regulations of specific cities, 900 parts, 3 different sub-assembly lines to put parts together into components, 6 assembly lines, and then all the rest that happened. And by then they're up to about 200 employees. And the picture there is a photo of one of those taxi meters, courtesy of Rich Anderson, which is over here today. And again, the museum has one of these as well, which was literally found on the street in Hopewell. You know, this is what we do to find stuff in this town. Sort of amazing. The bottom right is the executives, working on the taxi meter. So there's a lot of taxis there. So are they installing them? Are they testing them? We don't really know. But in the background, we're looking across Somerset Street. That's where the parking lot was. And that's the building that we just saw in the aerial. That's there where that original building was. So we get glimpses of this kind of thing going forward. So that's 63. So we get into the 70s at this point. So 1970s started off with a bang with Hurricane Doria. And if you're concerned about flooding in this area, we have a lot of evidence of what it looked like in 1971. The museum has an incredible collection of photos of the Rockwell building as it was flooded. The bottom floors of the Rockwell building was where all the manufacturing was done. That's where all the important equipment was. And that was at least 3 feet underwater after this. And these are just 2 examples of that. Excuse me? Did it glow in the dark? No, I don't think so. Well, the amazing thing was the employees were really dedicated and they got this plant going again within a month, which is just astounding, absolutely astounding. I mean, 100 electric motors had to be repaired or replaced. All the the electric paneling, the wiring, and all that kind of thing. It's just an amazing job to get that going. All for naught, because in 1973, Rockwell started closing down the plant. Okay, so the parent company, Rockwell Manufacturing, was joined with other Rockwell places to become a conglomerate, because this was the age of conglomerates. You remember that good old time. And so Rockwell was into space, and they were into aeronautics, and they were into military weapons and all that kind of stuff. And manufacturing was just a little piece of that. And it was a time for consolidation, and a silly little 200, 400 person plant was no longer of interest. So they shut the plant down. So they started in 73 when there were about 400 people working here. And by August 74, they were down to about 120, and they officially announced the closing at that time. So on the left are 2 newspaper clippings that sort of tell a story. The one on the left is promoting this great Rockwell plant, and we're in Hopewell, and we do all these things, and we help the parent company, and we're a partner in the whole company. And then the one on the right is the auction where they were selling off the equipment in the building. So, oh well. And then the photo on the right is Merlin Smith, who I mentioned earlier. So he's the grandson of Hugh Smith. He started working at Rockwell when he was in high school, and not a senior in high school, earlier than that, and continued working there. And at the closing, he was the acting general manager of the facility. So he was the 4th generation of Smiths in the building, which is pretty astounding. So then what? Then Hopewell has a big empty plant, so that's not good. But luckily, Kooltronic showed up. So Kooltronic is a company that's into cooling, that you may have guessed, but special, custom, in some cases, cooling for difficult environments, particularly electrical equipment and that kind of thing. They had a plant in Princeton, and they saw the opportunity to jump on this building. And with the help of a $400,000 loan from the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, they bought this plant and moved in. So you see, it's no longer the job of local boosters to attract business. It's now a state level business to attract business. And so they operated here. So now we're going to jump a decade to 1984. And this is the east side expansion of the building. So if you look on the photo on the right, there's a whole bunch of junk at the back of this building, including a Quonset hut and some other small buildings. So with another $2.5 million of state funding, Kooltronic replaced that with what is there today. So if you go there today, there's no longer a driveway down that side of the building. There's no longer parking down that side of the building, because they put this in and stretched out the building. And so that's 84. So we jump forward again to 99, when they closed, when Kooltronic shut down here, and then they moved out the Hopewell Pennington Road, also known as Route 654. So if you go out towards Route 31, very near the end of 31, Kooltronic is on the left. Doesn't look like a big facility. It is a very large facility, but it goes away from the road, so it doesn't seem so big. And the building was renovated, and you can see some photos here as the Hopewell Center. And the idea was it would be office and storage space. So just a couple of examples of companies that were in there. There were architects and others in there, but Studio Zen, a wellness facility that had lots of classes, was in there in 2004. The Princeton Doll Museum, and Frank's here today, was there in 2015, having been across the street in what's now the Twine Building. And they also used it as a storage space. So the picture on the top right is actually from an old Facebook page for, Hopewell Center as personal storage, basically. So that brings us to the end of the 1990s, except that there was a big problem there. And so in the early 1990s, it was discovered that there was contamination in that area. And at that point, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection gets involved, and they drive, and they're still driving the whole process for here. So this is a very high-level summary of this whole thing. So in the early 1990s, there was sampling around the site to figure out what the situation was. In 1995, there was a preliminary assessment that's an official document that identified 21 specific areas of concern. There was a dump here, there was a pond here, there was storage of containers that we're not sure exactly what here, there's some radium here, that kind of thing. And then in 1999, Rockwell assigned the administrative consent order because they were the owners at the time, and they bore the responsibility to clean this up. So there was a soil remediation phase around 1999-2000, where the earth was ripped off and taken away. There was a groundwater remediation stage where a plant was installed. A pump and treat is the technical name, believe it or not. So they're extracting groundwater, cleaning it up, and then putting it in the stream. So that plant is there and will continue to be there for quite a while. And then there was a phase of getting rid of the residential housing that was along there as well. So if you look at this 1931 aerial, the highlighted section is that original Smith building. You can look up Somerset and see other stuff along that side of the street. And that grew into a residential district. And the bottom right is the lot plan for that area of Somerset Street. There are a whole bunch of lots and a whole bunch of houses there, which have since gone. So that's why Somerset is empty there. They tore down the buildings and took them away. They ripped up the soil and took it away. And now there's nothing much left. So there is an ongoing process of monitoring and checking and reporting what's going on there. So Rockwell has hired a company to do that. That company continues to do that. And they continue to file reports. Those reports are on file at the borough and at the Hopewell Public Library. And we're also starting to work with that company to get digital copies of that stuff as well. So there's a lot more here if somebody wants to get into it, but this is the big picture of what's happening there. So we started with Hopewell attracting Smith. And then we talked about what Smith was doing for Hopewell. So we're going to finish with what Rockwell was doing for Hopewell. And just amazing, absolutely amazing. So first of all, it wasn't just jobs, it was careers. So in 1949, 14 employees had worked there 20 years, and one of them had worked there since the very beginning. In 1963, half of the 200 employees had been there at least 15 years, and 2/3 of those had been there for 20 plus years. And the company was estimated they were paying $1 million a year in local wages and local taxes. So very busy. The other thing that Herbert Rockwell was doing was providing the use of his land for local facilities. So one of those was a town dump, which now isn't such a great idea from our point of view. So up the end of Somerset to the left, past Valley Oil, was the town dump for a while. So that's one of those areas of concern that's being monitored. And the other thing was a skating pond. So again, if you stand on Somerset, you go past the current parking lot, you cross the stream, just beyond the stream, that area was a pond in Hopewell from before 1950 into the 1970s. So it was informally used as a pond, and then Herbert Rockwell was hired or was volunteered to really support that as a serious effort. So he put in a dam to create the pond. He put in lighting so the kids could play there at night. And the fire department would come in and spray it to get a nice smooth surface. And we actually have photos of that, which is just absolutely amazing. So the center photo there is kids skating on the pond. And the line of trees is the stream. And then the raised bank behind is the train line. So very busy. And then in the top right is that pond during the day and not in the snow. So this is the view from the train line as you went by. And so there was a big sign, Hopewell, Rockwell plant, taximeters kind of stuff on the sign. And the building is, in the back is a building that we don't see today. And the kids played there. So actually heard from a guy who remembers playing there. So let me just read this. We grew up around the corner on Lafayette Street from the 50s through the 60s. We spent a lot of time in those parking lots and in that pond. We skated almost every winter. At night, there was a light on a tree near the fire truck garage, which is now the Twine building. And the lights on this Rockwell sign were enough so that they had enough light to go skating. And the fire department would sometimes bring trucks down and shine the headlights so the kids could skate as well. During the summer, we would lash tire tubes to old doors and raft down the pond, gigging frogs in the reeds. We cooked the legs right on the bank by the dam. Particularly if you know what's in that water now. The stream nearby that flowed from under the tracks was loaded with snakes, salamanders, and crayfish. My mother hated those things. So that's thanks to Kip Lemon. So you just get a sense of what the town was like at the time. The other contribution to Rockwell was continual financial support for things in the town, and particularly the fire department. So the center picture on the right is a $15,000 fire engine that was donated in 1948. That's $1948, of course, because the town really needed a new fire engine. And this was such a big event in town. They had a huge parade, 1,500 people marching in the parade, 40 fire engines in the parade, a flyover for the parade. Big, big deal in town. So that's that engine at what's currently the firehouse in Hopewell in 1948. So that's pretty cool. And then in 1954, Herbert Rockwell organized a fire brigade in the building that's now the Twine building. So that's what this picture shows in the background there. That's now the Twine building. And the idea there was they took back an old fire engine from the fire company and refurbished it. But the idea was they were available on standby if the town needed it. So talking to local town people who worked here, the fire alarm would go off in Hopewell. The fire company and the first level of people who volunteered for the fire company would respond. If that wasn't enough, they'd blow the horn again. If the siren went off the second time, the Rockwell people would go. And the company just released everybody on the spot to go fight the fire. So, and that continued for what, a decade and a half in Hopewell. So it's an amazing journey to get from the beginning to where we are now, but now you sort of understand why. So this presentation I will put online. We have a video of this presentation that I'll put online. Just give me a day or two to get it done. And then there's a research report on this that I'll put online as well. And then there's a whole bunch of photos that are online already and some more to come as well. So I want to thank all of these organizations, the library, the museum, and the Historical Society, the Smith family in particular, for sending these photos that just showed up today, bless their hearts. And then a whole bunch of other people, including people who dumpster dives for invoices, a broken piece of an old Smith crate that we actually have here today that you can see. And then in the bottom right is a Rockwell ashtray. I have never seen a Rockwell ashtray, but apparently these were ubiquitous at the time. And so if somebody has one of these, we'd really like to see it because that's sort of interesting. So thank you all very much, and we'll take questions now. Thank you. And the people online can type questions into the chat and Bob will relay them as well. So yes, sir.
So the makes sense of the population pattern. So like the population of Hopewell Borough appears to get close to 2,300 people in the 1970s, and it's fallen by about 400 people since. So, I mean, it makes sense that X number of hundreds of jobs go away in the 70s, and we've had a fairly steady. We're about 20% smaller than we were in the 70s. Do you see that? Have you looked at any of the like town tax records, or I mean, that's a lot of jobs, a lot of taxes, local taxes,
Yeah.
a lot of residents pay property taxes, but
Right.
we have the infrastructure for a town that's 20% larger to pay for. Do you see that showing up in the records in the 70s?
Yeah, I don't have access to that kind of thing right now. That would be very interesting. Plotting local population as well. But other plants like Kooltronic, I don't think hired a lot of local Hopewell people. So and that could have been happening earlier, but it turns out to be a lot of Hopewell people. Because we do have records of the people. We have some Rockwell newses here from the museum, and we have some on the history project as well. And so they had parties, anniversaries for people who've worked there a long time and that kind of thing. That's what I would guess, but I'm not sure. But certainly during Rockwell, it was a lot of local Hopewell people. It was clearly that. And we know from the Smith records that was a lot of interaction with local businesses as well. You know, something came on the train, you hire a hauling company to get it to you and then to take it to Trenton for you, that kind of thing. Now, Smith bought products from the chocolate company, but it wasn't chocolate. It was containers, leftover containers. So Smith was buying leftover containers in the area. So that kind of thing just went on in this town. It was amazing. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so the facade changed during the Hopewell Center time. So the building was re-architected. The front entrance was changed with this large vertical structure, and then they put some bars up on the side. And then some of the brick was covered up, and it got this sort of pinkish tone to the building. So yeah, that was a deliberate change to make the building look less like a factory and hopefully more like an office complex. Yeah. Yeah, if you go there, you can compare the brick on the old part of the building to the newest building. It's sort of fascinating seeing that.
I can stand at time for the time that.
Yeah.
They also put windows, that wall, long boring wall, but it had a great Rockwell letters on it.
Yeah.
So they took the letters on, really.
Yeah.
Fake stucco.
Yeah.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
Understood that. And that stucco front, trying to make it out and angle. It's like when you see a bar, no offense to bar.
Yeah, so just repeating what you said, that long wall had windows on it, and taking down the Rockwell sign made it look particularly ugly. So there was work to clean that up. Excuse me?
Where do they keep the France and?
I don't know whether that's the
For the fire.
specific one that the fire company has right now. I'm not sure. Yeah, that would be nice to know if that's the same fire engine. Yeah, exactly. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you know when they tore down the Somerset houses, that whole bunch of houses?
Yeah, so somewhere in this period, Rockwell bought the houses, and I have deeds for some of that. And then the houses were abandoned and left abandoned because you need permits to demolish them. And so the neighbors on Elm Street were not happy about having all these abandoned buildings in the backyard. So it wasn't until later in the 2000s, sorry, that the buildings were apparently demolished. But we don't have an exact timeline of these things. Some of them were demolished earlier for the pump and treat building as well. Yeah.
When did they leave it back? Was it within 10 to build them? To build something?
Yeah, Rockwell bought out the properties because, and the houses because the ground was not good there. And no, no, no. No, the Somerset was emptied after the consent decree. And at that point, the New Jersey EPA was in charge and, you know, they drove the process from there.
So that's what I never understood is that in 2000, so that the white building that was in Paul, was not Paul.
Yeah,
So that thing disappeared. I don't know, I never found it. I can't even remember us.
Yeah.
Advisory, we're just like, we're in good shape. And I never understood that. It's beautiful building.
yeah.
There were 2 stories, but it must have been in really good shape.
Yeah, there were several buildings in that parking lot. You can see in some of these aerials. And they changed over time. And as you said, that nice white 1-story-ish building just disappeared. So yeah, there was a lot of construction. And then at the end, there was a lot of destruction in that area. Yeah. Anything online, Bob?
Yeah, we have one question online. Was radium the only contaminant?
Oh, no. Oh, no. No, no, no. I didn't list them all here. The report I'm going to post in a day or two has a much more exhaustive list, but there were, there's a list of 4 or 5 major things that were found in the groundwater, and there was a longer list than that of things that were found in the soil. In many cases, excuse me?
Big boom of trichloroethylene.
Trichloroethylene, okay. So, but like solvents and cleaning fluids and that kind of stuff. Some of the stuff was stored in barrels, so those locations became suspicious, and some of it was just runoff from running a factory there that whole time. So yeah, a big long list, right? Anything else? Going, gone. Well, thank you. Well, I got one more. Now what? Yeah, I very carefully didn't get anywhere near now what. So thanks for asking. There's a site. You understand what's going on there and why it's like that. Building there is a problem because it's been remediated, but there's still issues. Tearing that building down is a problem. It's a really sturdy building, but it's been flooded multiple times. And the ground under it is now problematical as well. So there's going to have to be, at some point, it's got to come down. So the town has to figure out how that's going to happen. And the town also has to figure out what's going to happen with the rest of Somerset Street, because there's a lot of property there, but it's, you know, dicey property. So it's not a happy situation. But there, you know, the EPA's on top of it. Rockwell's paying for the remediation, and so progress is being made, but it takes a while. Yeah. But behind you, yeah.
You only highlighted one flood.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I only highlighted that one flood as an example because we happen to have a lot of pictures of it, and it was particularly egregious. But yes, the flooding is an issue. So the idea of this discussion is to inform the future discussion of what to do about that. So there is a flooding issue. Now we understand and we see examples of it. There is contamination issue. We understand where the radium came from, for example. And No, there's no final date on remediation. It's till the EPA determines it's good. So that pump and treat water filtering is going to go on for quite a while. And then what has to happen when the building comes down and that earth is exposed becomes another question as well. And that's a lot of bricks to haul away as well. So, yeah.
That's true.
But yes, sir.
Yeah, I think one thing we should mention, that there is nothing in the ground that it has not been in the ground elsewhere in the United States and remediate. There are solutions for everything. The problem is the cost.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people forget this, but the first environmental stuff that happened was actually in Newark. And most of us around here are not probably familiar with Newark, but Newark has a problem relative to lead.
Mm.
And it was all this horrible stuff about lead. But the interesting thing about lead is that it goes down into the soil for a distance and then stops. So there's a lot of buildings that are down in the north of the old industrial area. You put clay on the top of it and don't dig down to where the lead is, it's fine. So I think, one thing we need to do is keep in mind that all of these things that we can see here have been dealt with. The question is one of economics and compensation for it. I mean, lots of stuff in San Francisco, a lot of former military bases.
Mhm.
And everything else. And the Rockwell that's currently paying,
Mhm.
Rockwell now is, that's a remainder company of a much larger company.
Yeah.
Did you trace up to find out who that is now?
I have records, but what it is right now, I'm not sure.
I think it's North. So North American Rockwell,
Yeah.
North American Aviation, that did the X-15.
Yeah.
And then also did Apollo. And it's now.
Yeah, so it's a messy situation. On the one hand, the EPA is on top of it. They have remediated it, whatever that means, and we're obviously concerned what that means. On the other hand, there's still the space where that building was, and there's still known stuff in the groundwater. So would people want to buy houses there? Maybe, maybe not. Should it be an industrial site? Maybe, maybe not. Should it be left empty? Maybe, maybe not. And the building, as you sort of suggested, constrains, protects the soil underneath right now. So it's like having, asbestos in your walls, but your walls are covered up. And as long as you promise not to get in there, you're okay. But you still don't necessarily want to be there because it's in the wall. So there's a perception issue and there's a fact issue as well related to this. But from a town trying to promote economic growth, there's an issue of who would want to live there, who would want to buy there. So yeah, it's a messy, messy issue. And part of the point of tonight was to explain quite how messy it was. Yeah, thank you. We done?
Say thank you, Doug, for
Mhm.
another meeting. Very well presented, detailed look at facts. Stay out of politics. Thank you for that, and I hope to have you back soon for another.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much.